At my grandfather's will reading, my uncle leaned in close, lowered his voice, and said, "You were just his charity case." I felt it like a slap. Not loud, not public, but sharp enough to slice something in me I didn't know was still soft. My cousin Tessa, sitting just 2 seats away in a silk dress too bright for a funeral, laughed without looking up from her phone. "He only tolerated you out of pity," she said, like it was a fact we'd all agreed on years ago. I didn't say anything. I didn't flinch. That was the rule. In this family, silence is armor, and speaking up is how you get gutted. I had learned that early. We were gathered around the massive dining table in my grandfather's estate, heavy oak, longer than necessary, surrounded by old family portraits that looked more like oil paintings of strangers. The room smelled like lemon polish and tension. My Uncle Calvin sat at the head of the table like he owned it already. Tessa sprawled next to him, bored, manicured, certain she was about to come into something big. And then there was me, Sarai, quiet, average, out of place in this family of loud, ruthless, glossy people. I wore a simple black dress. No designer label, no fake mourning, just me, holding on to the edge of the chair like I might fall if I let go. I had come because I thought I should, not because I expected anything. My grandfather, Howard Monroe, raised me after my parents died, but he'd never been warm. He was structured, efficient. He gave me a roof, food, and access to his private tutors, but never affection, never told me he loved me. And still, some small, foolish part of me hoped there was a reason he brought me in, something more than duty. The lawyer cleared his throat. His name was Mr. Blanchard. Crisp suit, calm voice, no-nonsense demeanor. He'd been with our family forever, one of the few who treated me with a basic kind of respect. He began reading the will, and I braced for what I knew was coming. Calvin got the real estate, the stocks, the antique cars. Tessa got a trust fund and jewelry that had belonged to our great-grandmother. The tone was businesslike, emotionless. I waited for my name. Nothing. Then Mr. Blanchard paused, just for a second, enough to make the room shift. "There is one final item," he said, looking directly at me. "Your grandfather recorded a personal message. It is to be played for one person only, Sarai Monroe." Every head turned. "What kind of message?" Calvin asked, his tone instantly defensive. "A video message," Mr. Blanchard replied, lifting a small silver flash drive from a leather case. "He recorded it shortly before his passing. He was specific. It is not to be shared, discussed, or replayed in this room unless Sarai gives her consent." Tessa rolled her eyes. "You're kidding. He left her a video? That's what she gets?" Calvin didn't laugh. He looked at me like I'd stolen something. And still, I said nothing. I just stared at the flash drive. My hands were in my lap, clenched so tightly I couldn't feel my fingers. I didn't know what the message would say. Part of me didn't want to hear it, not in front of them, not if it confirmed what they were saying, that I was never more than a shadow in that house. But something in Mr. Blanchard's expression stopped me. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He looked steady, like this mattered, like he knew it mattered. I nodded once. He slid the flash drive into the laptop. The room went quiet. Not respectful quiet, suspicious quiet. You could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, that I was about to be embarrassed. Again. And then the screen came to life. My grandfather's face appeared, pale, tired. But his eyes were clear, and the first words he spoke were, "Sarai, if you're hearing this, then I've already left. But there are things you need to know." The entire room froze. Growing up in the Monroe family felt like living in a house where you were always one mistake away from being invisible. It was grand, filled with chandeliers, piano music at dinner, and guests who wore designer clothes like armor. From the outside, everything looked pristine. Inside, it was cold. My name is Sarai Monroe. I wasn't born into this legacy. My parents, Rebecca and James, died in a car accident when I was 12. There was no one left to take me in, so my grandfather, Howard Monroe, stepped in. He didn't say much the day he brought me to his estate. He just handed me a key to a guest room and said, "Make yourself useful." He was a man of systems. He liked his mornings quiet, his papers ironed, and his family in check. He paid for my schooling, kept me fed, and never raised his voice. But he never called me his granddaughter. Not once. The only time I ever saw him smile was when my cousin Tessa got accepted into some overpriced private academy. She was the kind of girl who had her name stitched into her clothes, who rolled her eyes at the help, who only spoke to me when she needed someone to cover for her. Her father, Calvin, my uncle, was no better. He ran the Monroe business empire after my grandfather stepped down, and from the moment I arrived, he made it clear that I was not family. I was a stray taken in, a reminder of a tragedy they never wanted. Still, I kept my head down. I studied hard. I graduated early. I worked small jobs during the summers while Tessa traveled to Europe, and Calvin bought lake houses he never used. I was grateful, even when it hurt. Told myself that maybe if I stayed out of the way long enough, they'd eventually see me. Really see me, but they didn't. Even after I moved out at 21, I sent my grandfather birthday cards. I visited when I could. I brought groceries when I knew the staff was off. He never asked for it, never thanked me either. He would just nod once and go back to his crossword puzzles. When he passed, I didn't cry the way I thought I would. I felt like something ancient had finally gone still. The funeral was tasteful, expensive, full of people who called him a legend and a force. I stood in the back, not because I was hiding, but because no one offered me a seat near the family. Not that I expected one. 2 weeks later, I got the email from Mr. Blanchard, the family lawyer, formal as always. He requested my presence at the Monroe estate for the reading of the will. I debated not going. I already knew what was coming. Calvin would get everything. Tessa would get enough to keep her smug for another decade. I would get a pat on the head and a kind word, if that. Still, I showed up. I wore a black dress I'd worn once to a scholarship dinner. I did my makeup like armor, kept my hair tied back. No frills, no room for hope. When I walked into the estate, everything felt the same. Same dark wood floors, same smell of polished brass and fading flowers. The paintings on the walls watched like they were waiting for someone to disappoint them. Mr. Blanchard greeted me at the door. He was polite, his face unreadable. Calvin sat at the far end of the table, his Rolex catching the light as he tapped the wood impatiently. Tessa scrolled on her phone like the whole event was a waste of time. No one looked up when I walked in. No one greeted me. I took a seat near the middle of the table, not close enough to pretend I belonged, but not far enough to look like I was hiding. I wasn't here to beg for anything. I just wanted to hear the last words of the man who raised me, even if those words weren't meant for me. The chairs creaked. Mr. Blanchard opened the folder, and everything I thought I knew about this family began to crack. The will reading started like a transaction. No tears, no sentiment, just Mr. Blanchard's calm voice cutting through the silence of the room. I sat perfectly still as he unfolded the legal documents in front of him and began reading. "To my son, Calvin Monroe," he began, "I leave full ownership of the Monroe Properties portfolio, the Eastwood cabin, and the contents of my safety deposit box at First Federal Bank." Calvin didn't react. He sat with his arms crossed, like he had expected this all along. He gave a small, satisfied nod, like he was simply confirming what he already considered his. Mr. Blanchard continued, "To my granddaughter, Tessa Monroe, I leave the family jewelry, the contents of the Aspen storage unit, and the remaining assets of the Livingston Trust." Tessa looked up from her phone long enough to smirk. She glanced at me briefly, her mouth twitching like she wanted to laugh. She didn't. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Calvin got the power, Tessa got the sparkle, and I waited. Mr. Blanchard paused, flipping to the final page. My heart started pounding. I told myself not to expect anything, but it still hurt to sit there, waiting like some outsider who had wandered in off the street. "There's one final instruction," he said, his tone changing just slightly. "Howard Monroe left behind a personal message, a video recording. It is addressed to Sarai Monroe only." That's when Calvin turned his head, slowly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. Tessa stopped scrolling. "What kind of message?" Calvin asked. His voice was calm but tight. "A video," Mr. Blanchard said. "He recorded it in the final week of his life. He was very specific. It is not to be shared or discussed. It is for Sarai and Sarai alone." "A message?" Tessa said, the word practically dripping with sarcasm. "That's what she gets? Not even a keepsake?" She was barely family, Calvin added. He gave her a roof, fed her. That should have been enough. I didn't say a word. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me, tracing the wood grain with my fingertips like it might keep me grounded. I believe Mr. Monroe's instructions are to be respected, Mr. Blanchard said, holding up a silver flash drive. The message can be played now, but only if Sarai consents. Calvin leaned back, smiling like he already knew what was coming. Go on then, he said. Let's hear what old Howard had to say to his little charity case. Tessa snorted. I swear, if it's some speech about working hard and keeping your chin up, I'm walking out. I could feel their words trying to pierce me, but I refused to react. That was the only power I had ever had in this family, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I nodded once. Mr. Blanchard plugged in the flash drive. The room went quiet. No one shuffled. No one cleared their throat. Even the air felt still, like the house was holding its breath. The screen lit up. My grandfather's face appeared, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. He wore his usual navy sweater, and he looked directly into the camera. Sarai, he began, if you're seeing this, I'm gone. The sound of his voice filled the room, and everything changed. No one spoke. Calvin's smirk faded. Tessa sat straighter in her chair. He didn't sound tired. He didn't sound formal. He sounded like a man with something real to say. I never said much while I was alive, he continued, but there are things I need you to hear, things I should have told you a long time ago. I sat frozen. My palms were damp and my jaw was tight. I didn't know what was coming, but I could feel the weight of it already. From across the table, Calvin's eyes shifted to mine. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked wary. And just like that, the power in the room had shifted. For the first time in my life, everyone was silent, and they were all listening to something meant only for me. I don't remember breathing as the video played. My grandfather looked straight into the camera, but I felt like he was looking directly at me, like he had waited his whole life to finally speak freely. Sarai, you were never supposed to be a burden, he said. You were the only one who never asked for anything. I heard someone shift behind me. Tessa crossed her arms. Calvin looked uncomfortable now. I stayed still. You were 12 when you arrived here, my grandfather continued. Your parents were gone. I wasn't ready for another child in the house, especially not after everything with Calvin's mother. But I took you in because your father was my son too, even if I never acknowledged it publicly. My hands gripped the sides of the chair. I felt my pulse in my ears. There was a ringing, but I didn't look away from the screen. Yes, Sarai, your father, James Monroe, was my son. I loved him, but he wasn't born in marriage. It was the 60s. Things were different then. I was young, foolish, and afraid of ruining the Monroe name. I made a mistake. I let society dictate what kind of father I was allowed to be. A gasp escaped from Tessa. Calvin said nothing, but his face was turning red. I didn't raise James. I failed him, and when he died, I saw a second chance in you. I couldn't say the words. I didn't know how to be open, but I watched. I saw you every day. I saw how hard you worked. I saw you put this family first when no one ever did the same for you. My eyes burned, but I held back the tears. I couldn't cry here. Not yet. Not in front of them. You covered for Calvin when he took company funds to bail out that failed startup. I know about it. You paid part of the accountant's silence fee with your own college fund. There was a sharp sound, Calvin's chair scraping as he sat back harder than before. He looked at me now like I was a stranger. Tessa looked confused. I didn't protect you the way I should have, my grandfather said. I let you be treated like a guest in your own home. That is my greatest shame. So I did the one thing I knew would make a difference, even after I'm gone. Mr. Blanchard pressed pause. I blinked, confused. There's more, he said, standing slowly. But before we continue, I need to state something for the record. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder. Several years ago, Mr. Monroe initiated a legal adoption. It was finalized. Sarai Monroe is, under the law, his daughter. She is his sole, direct heir. Calvin stood up. This is a joke, he said, his voice rising. He was senile. That wasn't real. That was never mentioned. Mr. Blanchard didn't flinch. He filed it himself. There are notarized signatures. It is binding. Tessa stared at me like she was trying to reprocess every conversation we'd ever had. Calvin leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "You knew about this?" he demanded. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't." And that was the truth. I never knew any of it. I never imagined he would go through legal steps to claim me as his own. I thought I was just someone he kept around out of guilt, but now the entire foundation of my identity was shifting beneath me. Mr. Blanchard continued. As the legal heir, Sarai now holds majority control of Monroe Enterprises. The estate's main residence and corporate voting rights transfer to her as per Howard Monroe's final will. The air felt heavy. Every eye in the room was on me. Not with pity, not with amusement, with something closer to fear. I was no longer the girl in the corner. I was the daughter, the heir, the one person Howard Monroe had trusted with everything. I turned back to the screen. My grandfather's face remained still, frozen in mid-thought before the final segment would play. I nodded. Keep playing it. Because now I needed to hear everything. Mr. Blanchard pressed play again, and my grandfather's voice returned. His tone was steady, but there was something different now, something heavier. He wasn't just leaving behind instructions. He was telling the truth, for the first time. I built Monroe Enterprises with one goal in mind: legacy. I thought that meant wealth, properties, the Monroe name on buildings. I was wrong. He paused for a breath. Not out of weakness, but deliberation. Legacy is not in the things we leave behind. It's in the people we shape and the ones we choose when the world says not to. Sarai, you were never just someone I took in. You were my second chance. I failed your father. I didn't deserve the right to raise his child, but you gave me that chance anyway. Calvin had sunk back into his chair, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark. He wasn't angry anymore. He was unraveling. Tessa stared at the screen like she was watching a stranger speak her grandfather's words. You were the only one in this family who never lied to me, my grandfather continued. You never used my name to get ahead. You never asked me for favors or tried to manipulate my decisions. You earned everything you have, and I made sure no one could take it away from you. My throat tightened. Every memory rushed back in waves. Studying alone at night while Tessa partied. Skipping meals to save money when I was too ashamed to ask for help. Fixing the leaky sink myself because the staff wouldn't bother. I thought no one noticed, but he had. I know this will anger them, he said plainly. Let it. They had my attention their whole lives. You had my respect. That is why I've left the controlling shares of Monroe Enterprises to you. All executive decisions now require your approval. You don't need to play by their rules anymore. There it was. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Calvin shifted in his seat like the room had suddenly become too small. His empire, his boardrooms, his meetings. It all belonged to me now. Tessa looked lost, the arrogance gone from her face. My grandfather leaned forward slightly on the screen, his voice lower, more personal. Don't waste time proving yourself to them. You already did. Walk forward. Take what's yours. You were the future of this family the moment you walked through my door 12 years ago. I was just too proud to say it. He looked down for a moment, and when he looked back up, his voice softened. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. You were never a burden. You were my redemption. The screen went black. No one moved. Not a whisper. Not a breath. I looked at the table in front of me, then across to Calvin. His face had hardened into something unreadable. He looked like a man who had just seen everything he built handed to someone he never considered worthy. Mr. Blanchard cleared his throat gently. That concludes the contents of Mr. Monroe's final statement. Calvin stood slowly, but his voice carried weight. We'll contest this. You're welcome to, Mr. Blanchard replied, but I suggest you read the corporate bylaws your father revised last spring. He appointed Sarai as successor CEO in writing. It's already been filed with the board. The transition has begun. Tessa looked from him to me. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. Did you know about this? No, I said. I didn't, and I meant it. I had no plan, no scheme, no secret ambition. All I ever wanted was to feel like I belonged. Now, without warning, I held the keys to everything they thought would be theirs. I stood. I felt shaky, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being seen. I didn't speak out of spite. I spoke because it was time. "You made it very clear I didn't matter," I said, looking between them. "Now you'll have to figure out how to live with the fact that I do." And then I walked out of the room, not because I had anything to prove, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to stay and listen. I didn't go back into the house after that day. I left the estate and walked to my car without looking over my shoulder. The air outside was crisp, the kind that makes your lungs ache in a good way. I sat behind the wheel, closed my eyes, and breathed for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't about the company. It wasn't even about the money. What shook me was hearing him say it. He saw me. My grandfather, who had never once said he loved me, had left me the truth. In that room full of people who spent their lives measuring worth in power and inheritance, I finally had something real. I had a name that meant something, not because it was Monroe, but because he chose me. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Mr. Blanchard handled the logistics. He was efficient and direct, checking in often but never intruding. The company board scheduled an emergency session to confirm the transition. Calvin didn't attend. He sent his lawyer instead, who delivered a stack of paperwork trying to freeze the transfer of control. It failed. Howard Monroe had been meticulous. Tessa posted a vague message on social media about betrayal and family politics. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She called once, left a voicemail that started with fake kindness and ended with bitter resentment. I deleted it. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted space that was mine. No carved portraits, no antique rugs, just clean lines, open light, and the sound of my own voice when I spoke out loud. The first day I walked into Monroe Enterprises as the official majority shareholder, the receptionist looked up at me like she was expecting someone else. I gave my name and watched her eyes widen slightly before she stood to buzz me in. The office was full of people who had known my name only in passing. I could feel the curiosity, the doubt, the silent calculations. But I kept walking. I remembered what he said. Don't waste time proving yourself. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to lead. In private, I still carried questions. Why didn't he tell me sooner? Why didn't he treat me differently while he was alive? Why did it take death to finally be acknowledged? I don't have all the answers. I probably never will, but I'm learning to live with that. A month after the will reading, I visited his grave. I brought no flowers, just a letter I had written the night before. It wasn't full of forgiveness or bitterness. It was honest. I thanked him for finally telling the truth. I told him I would take care of what he left behind, not for his legacy, but because I knew how to rebuild things that were broken. I always had. I left the letter at the base of the headstone and stood there until the wind picked up. Then I turned and walked away. Sometimes I still hear their voices, Calvin's mockery, Tessa's laughter, the echo of 1,000 small dismissals that piled up over the years. But they don't sting the same way anymore. I don't flinch. I don't shrink. I've built my own voice now. I use it in meetings, in boardrooms, in places where people once looked past me. I'm no longer the quiet girl in the corner. I am Howard Monroe's daughter. Not by name alone, but by right. And more than that, I am Sarai. Fully. Unapologetically. The lesson in all of it is simple. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who never really saw you. But when someone finally does, when someone chooses to leave you the truth instead of just things, it changes everything. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't fix the past. But it gives you the power to write the next part yourself. And I intend to write it well. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or like you didn't belong, I hope this reminded you that your worth isn't defined by what others give you. It's defined by what you survive and who you become after. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling me your thoughts or your own story. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you want more true stories that dive deep into family, truth, and resilience, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.